My heart always beats really fast before I call. And I'm calling you because we're walking through your area on May 4th, and we are looking for a place to stay. We're wondering if your church would be interested in hosting us for an overnight stay in your church building. We have about 30 people. We're just looking for a floor, really, to sleep on. We're bringing all of our own mats, and no, you don't need to have showers. Thank you, Kimberly. Have a good day. That's our first Catholic maybe. That's pretty exciting. I'm really excited about walking. I think it will be a profound experience. I have no idea what kind of transformations it will have for us.
I work with Christian peacemaker teams on the Indigenous Peoples Solidarity Project or team, and this fit into our mandate of providing education and conversation with our people, so the church and settlers. My ancestors came from Ireland and lived on land that was Indigenous land, and so this is something little I can do to bring about more equality with me and First Nations.
Our day begins at 6:30 in the morning. People are up. There's a group off who are prepping our lunch foods while others are getting our breakfast foods ready. We come together, we pack our snacks for the day, and then we share a common meal. And after that, after we've packed our bags, then we gather for a time of centering where we acknowledge the land, we acknowledge an article of the Declaration, we remember why we're walking. Then we set out on our walk. Somewhere between 25 kilometers to 38 is our longest day. And usually around 5 or so, we would end up at our next host community, often a church. In that space, we'd be warmly welcomed by a church community for a communal dinner. And then around 7:30, we'd have another teach-in and conversation around why we care so much about the UN Declaration, why we think it really is good news for everybody in Canadian society, let alone the church. And then we'd break off at around 9:30 and have our debrief circle and crash at 10, just exhausted.
It's hard, physically very hard, but it's worth it. There was a few nights ago when it was about 3 o'clock in the morning and Junia, my daughter, still hadn't gotten to sleep, and I was exhausted, and I'd walked 25 kilometers the day before, and I had another 30 to do the next day. And I was so close to calling my husband and saying, "You need to come and get her because I can't do this anymore." It was a hard night. This is going to be her job. Dealing with reconciliation is her generation's job, and it's important for her to be here, to have this experience to look back on, and to sort of start her off on a good path.
I've been walking on the pilgrimage for the Indigenous rights for the last 2 weeks. It started in Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario, and it's going to stop in Ottawa. I wanted people to know that if Bill C-262 gets accepted, then Indigenous peoples will have rights like everyone else. Many Native peoples on reserves don't have clean drinking water, which is what I've noticed. Another thing is that many Indigenous peoples were here before the settlers came, and the government has not given them back some of their land, even though they rightly own it. I hope that this walk makes the government think a little bit more about Bill C-262 and UNDRIP, that they might accept it.
The opening ceremony at Sterling Mennonite Church really, I felt, set us off in a good way with Elder Mang and Henry offering a traditional send-off ceremony with smudging and a pipe ceremony and some words of encouragement of the importance of us doing this walk.
Some figure that this is far too political and this is not where the church ought to be. However, for me, this is gospel. The church was there very, very much involved with the residential school, and the church needs to be here involved now to strive for healing, for reconciliation. And we need to take a very hard look at that and encourage each other to change our mind, to change our thinking.
The violation of fundamental Indigenous human rights in this country has become really normalized. I mean, when you're talking about, several communities, more pronounced in Ontario, of course, with water boil advisories. We just had a whole bunch of flooding that happened in Quebec, and I'm glad that the National Guard came out to help communities. But the reality is there's communities in Manitoba that have been, families that have been homeless for years now. Years, some as long as 2010, waiting to get back in their house. There was no National Guard that came out for them.
Sometimes in this conversation where we talk about respecting the basic rights of Indigenous peoples, we're talking about clean drinking water for everyone, equity when it comes to educational funding, basics in housing care, and so on. Like just basic rights for people to both survive and to flourish. When it comes to some of these larger conversations on land and the redistribution of land, that is a reality that we're going to have to engage. And sometimes that it's not even lifted up by settler allies and Indigenous folks who are engaging in the conversation, because those are the scary zones for a lot of people. But those are conversations that we need to have. The reality is approximately 99.8% of the land in Canada is controlled by settler society. Only 0.02% is our Indian reserves, right? So there needs to be a radical restructuring of that relationship where Indigenous peoples have some land repatriated to them and they have actual jurisdiction over their land. Now in my tradition, in this Christian tradition, there are old memories that invite us to engage such conversations. The Jubilee Proclamation of Jesus is the example, right? Where he says it's time for a politics of redistribution. And his own community didn't like that word. They got a little anxious about what it might entail for them. It's the same with us. If we believe though that if one part of the body is hurting and you heal that part of the body, it brings life to the rest of the body, then I think we have to lift up those kind of metaphors that can give us space to even entertain that.
I told the crowd this evening that after coming out of residential school and having spent 10 years in residential school, I needed to do something meaningful with what happened, because that was a cultural, linguistic, and political incarceration, if you ask me. Cultural because I was taken away from my people, from my culture, from my parents, from my territory. Linguistic because we weren't allowed to speak our languages in those institutions. And political incarceration because the only reason they did that is because I was Indian. So when I came out after 10 years, I set out to reconcile with the people that put me away for 10 years in a meaningful way.
Well, it's a lonely struggle, I've been at it a long time, and it's so hopeful to see non-Indigenous people walking in solidarity with Indigenous people for 600 kilometers, 22 days, sometimes with no showers, sleeping on church floors, During a flood season, they've had, serious cold, rain. It makes me feel hopeful. It makes me feel like change is becoming more and more possible by the day, and that people want to do better and they want to participate in that change.
This is a piece that I wrote for this Indigenous pilgrimage book. Why I walk. I walk out of a position of privilege, white, male, affluent enough to fly and take time out of work to walk, senior enough to take time out from work to walk, family grown enough that I can take the time, and healthy enough to attempt the walk. I walk to be part of change, just and equal relationships demanded, confessing my personal and society's ignorance in past dealings with Indigenous peoples, wanting change to start here and now, not after many more years of discussion. I walk asking for forgiveness, for not standing up for the oppressed, out of ignorance, having done little to educate myself about Indigenous concerns and their treatment in the past. Out of the doctrine of discovery into mutual discussion and accommodation. I walk in love, as God in Christ calls us to love all people, called to treat all as equals with the same needs and rights to the basics, willing to work together to meet all our needs, that we may all share the same benefits and rights, and for peace and right relations with all.
This is a specific response to the calls to action of the TRC, specifically call to action number 48, which calls churches to engage in public dialogue and action surrounding the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Really cool to see how this walk space has brought together some different people and some specific people who have really spoken into the group here.
And on this journey, this walk, there has been a child in a stroller from Kitchener to Ottawa. Someday she'll learn about her journey and what it meant. Right now she's dependent, but one day she will be interdependent. From dependence to independence to interdependence, we grow as human beings on the earth, sustained by people and by the earth itself, our mother, the earth. We become community. We become churches, we become community members with responsibilities. So I want to leave you tonight with the idea that the walkers are teaching us about the importance of interdependence. They don't walk for themselves, they walk for others. They walk because they believe the society can be transformed to include even residential school survivors. That wounded people can have a place in community. And so I thank the walkers for that modeling of community, of interdependence. So the enacting of 262 is a step towards the government of this land acknowledging interdependence of all peoples
One of the things that I've heard walkers pick up on is Rary Hoquat's comment around the work involved with working for justice and reconciliation between Indigenous and settler peoples, and not to really expect to see it as necessarily an easy walk or easy journey to take.
Many of you were around in 1969, which was the year in which Canada declared as the Dominion that there would be no more Indians in Canada. Do you remember that? Do you know that? It was called the 1969 White Paper. And that White Paper said that there will be no more Indian rights, there will be no more Indian reserves, and there will be no more Indians in Canada. 1969. You see, how do we reconcile ourselves to that? You see, and it's very difficult, for those of you who want to do something, want to be a part of reconciliation, want change. It's very difficult for you to understand the depths to which this goes. This is not a problem of kiss and make up. This is a problem of altering the very fundamental nature of Canada. That's what it's all about. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to continue with your determination to do it, be prepared for a long and difficult battle. You will be discouraged. You will be disappointed. You will question yourself and question your country. But if you're going to engage in reconciliation, I certainly welcome you. I hope you stick to it. And it's just too much of me to ask you to do that. If you decide to do it, that's wonderful.
When we get to Ottawa, there will be a celebration and a lot of sitting. And I don't think the journey stops there. I think there are so many other things that I want to do. And as Romeo said last night, September is coming. There's big things happening.
So we're here at Ottawa Mennonite Church, which is on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory, and we are looking forward to welcoming a large number of walkers here on the pilgrimage for Indigenous rights. Their final destination is here. We're expecting them imminently, within 20 minutes, half an hour, so we're getting ready in church, being prepared, having food, ready to welcome them.
Standing in front of the Parliament buildings, and we are have walked 600 kilometers to get to Ottawa, and we are holding a rally later today that's happening by a monument that is about 8 blocks back that way.
Abby Heinrichs, 11 years old, walked 600 kilometers from the Stalo Nation of BC.
You're gonna mess up your makeup.
Abby's my walking buddy. She's a young warrior. She's a wise young woman. Do not underestimate the wisdom of 11-year-old young woman.
Here are some examples of why we need to adopt UNDRIP. Native children going to schools on reserve receive a lot less money than a child in a public school. A Native child gets $3,500 less funding than a public school child. Native people are treated a lot different than white people. For example, more than 150 First Nations today don't have clean drinking water. Finally, many Native peoples were here before the settlers came. So why hasn't the government given them back some of their land while they're on tiny reserves? I'm walking on this pilgrimage for many reasons. One of the reasons is because I think that Indigenous people should have equal rights like everyone else. Another reason is that I think that Prime Minister Trudeau should honor his promises to the Indigenous peoples. So, now that we're in Ottawa, I hope that the government decides to rethink about Bill C-262.
In our language, in Cree, is Nuijawagan. Nuijawagan are the people that we call our friends. And it makes reference to the act of walking by your side. That's a beautiful word. Nuijawagan, friends. Nuijamagan, he or she that lives with me. Beautiful word. So I wanted to thank them in Cree because that's how much respect I have for these people. Bill C-262 will be coming up for debate in the House of Commons next September, this fall, and vote on second reading. Bill C-262 is probably the most important piece of legislation that this country will have to consider in a long time in September. So make sure that you call your members of parliament and let them know that they have to accept this bill.
I want to let you know of people like Steve and Aaron and Kathy and Chuck. To you, thank you. It doesn't feel so lonely anymore. And to the walkers that I had a privilege of walking with, I love you. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for sleeping on floors and eating whatever was provided. That is walking the talk.
It's amazing, isn't it, when a group of people decide that they see injustice and they want to do something about it. It's powerful. It's really powerful. And to be honest with you, personally, I had issues with churches. I really did. And yesterday when I was walking with this particular group for a short time, I felt a healing, a nourishment, and this is what grassroots resistance looks like. It heals and it nourishes people, and this is how it should be, that at last the Indigenous people will have freedom, liberation, and self-determination. Isn't that incredible to say that in this era? In this era. And one of the I Don't Know More gentlemen here, Tito, is going to sing them a song to honor them, and I want to bring him, and he'll introduce himself briefly, and then he'll sing a song for them. So I want to thank every one of you for being here and wanting justice, because in order to have reconciliation, there must be truth. There has to be truth that needs to be told. So thank you.
From the heart of the Maya, in the land of the Quetzal bird, we are just connecting with all the struggles here in the north. We are the same people. We are indigenous of this planet. We need to idle no more together. People of all nations, people of all trends, enjoy this proclamation of freedom and strength. People of all nations, people of all trends, enjoy this celebration of freedom and strength. Idle no more, idle no more.
So this fall is pretty significant in Canada for a couple of reasons. One is it's the 10-year anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's also the time when Bill C-262 goes up for second reading. And if it doesn't pass, then it's quashed. So I think churches need in the fall to rally, to not only phone up their MPs, but take more significant public action so that people can see, not just Indigenous peoples, but all people can see there's a significant contingent within Canada that really believes that this is for the betterment of all of us. Yeah, I was reading the book Surviving Canada, which is reflecting on this July 1st Canada 150 that's coming up. And in that book, they challenge every Canadian to take 3 actions that would respond to Indigenous voices and concerns in their families, neighborhoods, and in the larger nation. We begin at home in our own places, then we stretch out, and we need to engage in a national conversation because so much of this relationship is dictated by these larger forces.